Thank you. Most of you would have been following the program of the government to reach out to our people across the country and to address many of the issues that they have been raising with us. I must say that the outreaches have been serving their purpose, which is to give the government a closer, more in-depth understanding of what the key issues are on the ground, the challenges facing our people. And hopefully, by that greater understanding of these challenges, being able to put in place mechanisms to resolve them. Now, let me say right at the beginning, not every problem that is raised on the outreach would we be able to resolve. Many of the issues that are raised there are of the nature, a private nature, and some require a breach in what the government system is. For example, if a person were to come and say, I applied for a house law, and I didn't get through, but they applied only 6 months ago, there is a system in place where those who have applied earlier would be processed first. So we would not be able to immediately resolve that issue because we have to go through the system. It's only fair as we develop the more plots of land, then their concerns too will be addressed, and we have to make sure that they understand that their issue, they will get help, but it will take a bit longer. And so we've been busy trying to resolve the issues. There are thousands of issues that have come to our attention. As you see for yourselves, people are not shy about raising their concerns at these meetings. And sometimes the concerns have nothing to do with government, but we still have to try to resolve them. We've put in place a mechanism to follow up right up to the ministerial level, and quite a few of the issues have already been resolved, and we're in the process of resolving others. So I want to urge people to continue to utilize this mechanism, but with that understanding that there are things that we can do, and then there are other things that we may not be able to do immediately. Now, a lot has been written about the promises we've made and our ability to keep these promises. And since I'm fresh back from the outreach in Region 10, I want to draw your attention to what we are often confronted with in attempting to solve people's problems. So the opposition knew that we were going to be there in Region 10 because we had announced it and we were preparing for it to go there to fulfill the promise that we had made earlier, that is to roll out the part-time employment program in Region 10. And so I saw a release from the PNC saying that they will have an outreach the same day. Now, there is nothing wrong with that. We live in a free country, and the PNC has a right to do as it pleases. But it's what you say to people, and this is what I want to urge Guyana to understand, and the people in Linden particularly, how we've been subjected to a barrage of lies historically, and it has continued. So on that very day, APNU distributed several flyers. The leader of the opposition and his minions distributed quite a few flyers. Now I'm going to just take you through a few things on the flyers to show you and here in this press conference and the people of the country how it is almost impossible to engage with people who are so blatant in their lives and often so misleading, and that it's impossible to have a rational conversation with. So let us start from the beginning. This is the document that was distributed. So it says, the PPP, this is to the people in Linden, slashed the salaries of nurses who protested Rudy Small from $111,000 to $300 Ghana dollars a month. So that is here. You would see for yourself. So that here. 2, in 2019, the PPP informed the UK CIF Caribbean Infrastructure Partnership Fund that the Linden-Mabura Road project was not a priority project for their party, and if they were successful in the upcoming elections, they would cancel the project. Now, we did have a conversation with the British at my office, and my concern at that time was that we selected a project. APNU was going forward with a project that was not the greatest priority at that time. Now, the Linden-Mabura link was not the most feasible part of the link from Soesdijk to Brazil. The Soesdijk Linden component was the most feasible part of the highway. So they were going to go focusing on the Mabura, getting the British to fund the part from Mabura to Linden without any plan or financing to do the Linden-Soesdijk highway. And my point that if you look at any feasibility study would show that had a greater value to the people in Region 10 and particularly those in Linden. Now when we got into office, we decided that it's impossible to make the shift at that time. Because, so what did we do? We then decided that we had to find the money now to do the part from Linden to Soesdijk. And I explained that when I was on the retreat that we right now have a loan before the Islamic Development Bank for $120 million. We thought it would get to the board in September. It shifted to June, but it has been shifted to the September board. So now we can pave all the way from Soesdijk Junction all the way to Mabura. But the most feasible part of that road still remains the Linden-Soesdijk component. You have over 1,000 vehicles a day that traverse the section. When you do a feasibility study and calculate the economic feasibility, the stream of benefits, that would be the conclusion. But now we've taken care of that. And we're also doing the bridge across the river. Now they said they were going to do that bridge, but in abstract. we are going to go to tender. We're preparing the documents now that will go out shortly for a design build contract for 4-lane structure across at Wisma across the river. So this is totally untrue. It creates the impression that we were going to cancel the road, and only because the British wanted, otherwise the road continued. We were trying to get the resources done, shifted first of all to the Linden-Soesdijk junction, and then to raise the financing to go further. That is from Linden to Mahura, which is not used so much by as many people. They then said in the same release that in the COVID grant across the country, in Linden, people were given only one allocation per household, but across the country, PPP people got it by just providing their ID card, so implying that there are multiple grants given in single households. This is not factual. They can't substantiate with a single bit of fact. But again, this whistleblowing sort of racism, because they mislead the people in Linden. They say to them, you're treated differently than the rest of the country. This is an absolute lie. They said here in this, a mere $9 million has been budgeted for agro-processing facility in Linden, while $7.3 billion has been allocated for Enmore. Now, no money has been allocated for Enmore in the budget. Zero. What we have allocated is $1.2 billion for an industrial estate in the Buxton Falls NBC at Falls. An industrial estate for the East Coast. But they said $7.3 billion has been allocated for Enmore and mere $9 million for Linden. But remember, most people will not see this nationally, so they would now respond. But the people in Linden would read this. That is what Norton was doing, distributing these flyers. They said the PPP has dismantled the 5B programs that benefited children across Region 10. Now, for someone to say this, and when we now reinstituted the 10,000 grant and picking it up to 25,000 per child in both public schools and private schools, clearly is delusional, but they actually said it. They said they gave over 1,000 scholarships in the 5 years where youths in Region 10 benefited. Now 1,000 scholarships in 5 years, we've done 6,000 in the first year, and young people in Region 10 benefited. Under the APNU AFC, athletes from Region 10 receive house lots for their performance. Not regular people. They didn't do any housing for ordinary people. We're going to build 1,000 homes, and we're going to allocate maybe nearly 2,000 house lots just in that region. But they gave a couple of scholarship house lots for athletes in the region, apart from the APNU high officials taking all the lands for themselves, the Figueres and the others. They said under the APNU AFC, old age pension was increased from $7,500 to $20,500. Now, if you look at this, a person telling such a blatant lie would say this is over 100%. Now, I just asked my staff to check how much of what the rate was in 2014. It was actually $13,125. But they said it's 7,500. That's what their document has. So if you look at the growth from 2014 to 2020, it cost the Treasury $5 billion. In the first 2 years alone, that is on an annual basis for pensioners increase, it's now $5.4 billion under the PPP. And when we double old age pension by 2025, which we promised to do, it will be an annual increase of about $14.4 billion more. But a blatant lie again. Now, I can go through every lie in the flyer. For example, it says PPP not giving enough oil money to the people, distributing it elsewhere, but not giving money to the people in Linden. Questions about the voters list again, not mentioning that 460,000 actually voted of the 660,000 on the list, and that on the APNU in 2015 when they won, the same list was in place and had about 200,000 persons more than who actually voted. So the leader of the opposition was doing this in Linden. Instead of trying to talk about progress, he was busy spreading lies on the very day that we were there to try to look at the interests of the people in the country. And this is what they do. It's racism on the slide. It's coded. You know, you're being treated badly. Oh, sugar workers are getting a second severance. It's not true. Sugar workers are not getting a second severance. When the bauxite workers were laid off, I actually increased the severance, more than double their severance. They know that. There is a coded racism and a set of lies that they spread. So I hope that people, when I met and I spoke with the gathering there, I urged the people in Linden and elsewhere to read for themselves. And if you only were to examine this, you will see that much of what APNU says is not factual. For example, Anna Ferguson, in a letter to the newspaper, said that I've been promises being made by Jagdeo during PPP outreaches are inconsistent with the 2022 budget estimate. Start news. So she said, where is the money for the community roads? Well, on page 44 of the budget speech, if Anna Ferguson could really looked at the budget, but I can't expect her to look at the estimates. Might be a bit too complex. So even if she read the budget speech of the minister, he said on page 44, additionally, some 15.2 billion is allocated for the construction and rehabilitation of urban and community roads. That's written, that's in the speech. And then she can go to the estimates and she'll find it there. So everything that we've mentioned are covered by allocations in the 2022 budget. But she write the whole article, several pages a letter, just to prove a point where she didn't even read the budget speech, sat through it, the parliament, and didn't even read the speech. This is the sort of thing that we have to deal with in the country every single day. And it becomes a bit debilitating, but by now the country knows that we're not going to get better from APNU AFC. Now, I'm going to quickly take you through a couple of issues that have been in the media for quite a while now. On the oil and gas side, as you know, we're about to wrap up the audits for the 1999-2017 period. I think that should be done in a matter of weeks. And that the findings, once that's done, we will inform the public of the findings. The contract for the audit from 2018 to 2020 has been approved and signed now, and we're going to begin work in June. By the end of the third quarter, we should have the report. The audit should be completed, the first report. And this was done with a consortium of local Guyanese. You recall us talking about building local capacity with a consulting firm from the United States of America and another one, a UK technical firm, Martingale Consultants and SGS from the UK. So we expect the audit to be done, and also through the process of doing this audit, we will build local capacity. Now, we are currently working at preparing for the auction in September of this year, as we had promised. We are yet to determine whether there will be a national oil company. I see there has been quite a bit of debate surrounding this issue, and it's good that we have that debate, because we're still in the process of making a determination as to where we will go. And in the debate, at least in May, from the serious sources, we're getting a list of concerns that are universally known as regarding or where it relates to national oil companies. Questions about the time it takes to develop a national oil company, about an overload on domestic capacity, that the corruption associated with many national oil companies around the world, the examples are not encouraging. More importantly, from our side, we've been putting some additional concerns about national oil companies. Not the most obvious ones that I mentioned that have been written about by everyone, and not the fact that the IMF said that we shouldn't do it, because we don't take IMF lectures as gospel in this country. But from our own, given what we have been looking at, the examination of the situation, we believe that having an old-style model national oil company at this stage could present major difficulties for the country. So, first of all, with net zero target by 2050, it becomes harder to raise money globally for national oil companies. Two, that if we were to vest all of the remaining assets in a national oil company, it could lead to too much concentration and slow down the process of exploration. What I mean is that having just one strategic partner to work with would mean a much slower process of exploring for improving our resources in an era when we have to accelerate the proving of these resources and possibly get them out before the world totally decarbonizes. So that is an additional concern of ours. Therefore, let me say right at the beginning, the model that we are talking about, should we go down this route, is not an old style NOC. It is about more a passive ownership of shares in companies in exchange for some of the offshore blocks that we have given. So how does that work? In exchange for the offshore blocks that we will allocate. So how would that work, that model? We just simply say that we're getting a strategic partner, we are taking a share of the company, but we have no control over operations or management, except for the controls given to shareholders through ownership. And that is through passive ownership by virtue of owning shares. So that's the model. Notice I'm just telling you these because I want you to, especially the media, to understand what the thinking in government is at this point in time. No decision has been made. We have a lot of cons, a few pros, and the only pro, the one that would tilt this in favor of the establishment of not a traditional style NOC, but an NOC with a more passive form of ownership, is whether, and this is the key question here, whether we can get more revenue for the country that will come from a modified PSA. Because a modified PSA will give us a greater share of the revenue from oil and gas activities. Because the current stable PSA gives us a particular percentage of all that revenue. The new one that we're working on will give us a higher percentage. Now, can we get that and still get even more for the country by virtue of ownership of any shares in these companies? So those are the variables right now that are being explored, and once that is done, then a decision has been made. So the debate is welcome. It's a welcome debate in the newspapers. It may be seen as critical of the government. It is not. I don't mind people pointing this out, the negatives, because we have to address these issues when we make a decision. And I just want people to understand that we are taking these issues seriously. On the other hand, so whilst we welcome that debate, we've had a lot of crazy things being said too. And like you have Kaishore News with some guy called, what's his name? Sanzillo, yeah. Who've been saying some things that I wonder if he's been thinking before saying these things. So first of all, let's deal with this question about what the IMF recommended we should use our oil revenue to do. He suggested that we departed from what the IMF recommended that we should do with the oil resources. And they said that we should use it to close the fiscal deficit, reduce national debt, and save for future generations. That is the IMF prescription. Let me, before I go into why this is not a sensible or a feasible option for Guyana, nor will it bring the greatest benefit to our people, let me give you a couple of facts. Now, Norway started producing. Norway is used as the gold standard, in fact, the diamond standard for management of oil and gas money globally. They're considered to have the best model They have the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, and everyone uses Norway as the model. So Norway started producing oil in 1967. Norway established for the first time a sovereign wealth fund in 1996. 30 years after Norway started to produce oil and gas, Norway then established the sovereign wealth fund. Norway's per capita GDP was $2,514 in 1967. In 1996, the year it first established a sovereign wealth fund, like what we have a natural resources fund, its per capita GDP was in excess of $37,000. Now, today, our per capita GDP, it moved from the early 90s, about $300-400, to today it's $9,000, about $9,000. So Norway waited until its per capita GDP was literally $37,000. 30 years after it started producing, then it started saving for the future, because it recognized that you had to build national capability first before you started saving for the future. From day one, we are going to start saving. We establish a saving fund, the natural resources fund. And we now establish a sliding scale formula where once revenue exceeds 500 million per year, then that's a de minimis level. We start sharing, saving a growing percentage of the amount received. So clearly the good policy is that you have to invest in your country first. You have to have, let me put it the other way around, you have to have world-class infrastructure. You have to be able to address people's basic needs, education, healthcare, community roads, secure the country before you start saving for the future in any major way. That is what those countries determine. We adopted to save a bit for the future from the beginning. So the IMF model here, what they said is pay down the deficit. If you reduce the deficit now in this stage, that means we can't build our highways. We can't build the 4-lane roads necessary to take our traffic off. We can't build new power plants. We can't build the ports necessary to catapult our economy to the next level. We can't build the world-class hospitals and schools and universities that we need to grow our economy in the future. The IMF core job has been balancing budgets and making sure that you have balance of payment sustainability. They were set up as an organization to ensure that the external accounts, the BOP, was in balance. They're not a development institution. They won't work on development plans for the country. So paying down the deficit at this time is a pro-recession type of policy, and it is absolutely not needed at this time. Secondly, reducing the debt. Now, our debt figures, the total debt in the United States of America is about 100% of GDP, about 101% of GDP. In Europe, it's about 88% of GDP. Our total debt is less than 30% of GDP, but external debt in Ghana is 16% of GDP. Our capacity to borrow is significantly greater than most of these countries, and it's one of the lowest in the world and in this hemisphere. And it came down from 900% of GDP in the early days. So we don't have to reduce our debt further. We have to borrow for our highways now, but on careful terms. That's what we are doing, our hospitals, etc. Our capacity to repay is greatly enhanced. This guy says this. He has done no debt sustainability analysis, which we do constantly for Ghana. But he sits somewhere in the world and says, oh, they shouldn't be borrowing. Wait, it's utter nonsense. So, again, paying down that debt would not allow you to build out the infrastructure for the future. But he says we must do this. Then he says further that we should, the third point is that, every Guyanese, every citizen at present owes ExxonMobil $9 million Ghana dollars. Now, I don't owe Exxon no $9 million. Do you owe, any of you here owe Exxon $9 million? So nobody, I don't know about that. The only debts that this country has to repay is debts contracted or guaranteed by the state. And I told you already, that's only 16% of GDP. No debt contracted by Exxon or any of these companies are guaranteed public, or we are part by the government, nor are we party to those debts. So you don't have to pay the citizen of this country. Not a single. So he claims further that all these debts have to be repaid and everything else before we'll get any money. So that's not true again, because if you look at even the original agreement that was signed since 1999, you will see that there is a cutoff point for cost recovery from revenue of 75%. So 75% of revenue goes to cost recovery, including servicing debts and everything else. And 25% from day one becomes available as profit oil, of which we will get 12.5%, and then a 2 percentage point as royalty, which gives us about 14.5% from day one. So right now we have FPSOs that will probably, we have given licenses out that would guarantee production just above 800,000 barrels per day from the two Liza permits, Payara and Yellowtail. Once those projects go ahead, at about $50 per barrel per day, $50 per barrel, our share will be worth maybe about $2 billion per year. And if it's $100 a barrel, now today price is $120, but say it's $100, it's about $4 billion per annum. The government share will be. Now, that is more than twice the size of our total debt now. 1 year's revenue in the future will be about twice the size of, more than twice the size of our current level of debt. That is stock of debt. In 1 year revenue, we can take half a year's revenue and pay off all the country's debt. Now, that we guarantee. So I don't know where it's totally, I don't want to call it lunatic because I don't like to call people lunatic, but it's lunacy. Maybe not a person, I don't want to call a person a lunatic, but this is lunacy that passes off as analysis. And they're just confusing the hell out of people with this nonsense. Now, apart from that, it is not true that we owe $9 million each to Exxon, nor do we have to pay that back. We're forgetting the contribute and that there will be a revenue flow to the Treasury. You have to look at the contribution of this sector to the rest of the economy. The gas that will come in, that will allow us to generate cheaper power, which will have a major impact on our industries and consumers. The ability to produce the liquids that would allow us to cut cost of living through the cooking gas. The business through the other linkages in the economy through the local content law that will generate employment, maybe 5,000 people directly employed, and a lot of business for local. That has an impact on the economy. The de-risking of Guyana through, say, the expansion in the service sector, new hotels, more services to people, they contribute to a greater well-being and greater economic opportunities for people. So this is the total effect. I'm not looking at just the direct flows to the Treasury. None of this comes over in the analysis. And so I would urge you, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I can go through it in great details. It's just utter nonsense, and it's been raging. I don't know where they find these people. From some International Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. It is a fraud. Everything written so far is fraudulent. It's on the other question, again, this brings me to the point about the urging not to renew. There's been a lot of people internationally and locally who've been urging the EPA not to renew the permit for the Stabroek Field license. And effectively, that would shut down the production of oil and gas in the country. So that means we lose all of these revenues and we lose everything else. So I see some celebrities and everybody who live in their countries that are expanding oil and gas production now. They want us to stop it here in Guyana, but they don't even have a voice to stop it in their own countries. In fact, they're expanding. And I believe many of them, wittingly or unwittingly, they work for the lobby in these countries, the oil and gas producing lobbies, because they will. The world needs the fossil fuel now. That's why the price is $120 a barrel. That's why it's going up. There's a scarcity of oil and crude oil, and therefore they would reap all the windfalls, the rich countries in the world. So they want to shut it down in Guyana. We are causing climate change. We are destroying the planet. But every day, the greenhouse gases that get churned out of the developed world is maybe tens of thousands times more than our total greenhouse gas in Guyana. But they pick on Guyana because it's a small country. These NGOs and others, they pick on them, and they have some of the local people who make a living out of this too. It looks good on their CVs. They're fighting big bad ExxonMobil in Guyana, and they raise money and they get employment activity. So don't waste your time on these people. They'd have us suffer forever. And including some who are now who are flying around in private jets. They are telling us they don't worry about greenhouse gas emissions when they fly around in private jets, but they want us to stop producing. On the gas to energy project, we are now wrapping up. You know that 9 companies were pre-qualified. I think the lists were in the public domain. The 9 companies were they were listed in the public domain. This is after a long process. And the request for proposal will now go out before at the end of 2 weeks to these 9 companies to make the bids now for the power plant and the NGL facility. So we are hoping that that will happen very soon, and that we'll be able to move forward with this project that will transform the country's energy supply and also our supply of other liquids that we use. It's a very feasible project that would allow us to expand our economy, to cut our carbon emissions, and to ensure that that our development strategy gets implemented. Now, I would like to say something about this. A lot of the companies that are tendering, they have local representatives who have been saying they have agreements to represent these companies. And they're trying to get these companies to meet with government officials. Now let me make it clear. If any of these companies believe that meeting government officials would have, and anybody represented that to them, that they can arrange for them to meet government officials and it will improve their chances when the bids are evaluating, they're wasting their money by paying these local representatives, and they're wasting their time too. Because it's a lobbying industry. We've seen it with this process, an overload of people calling to set up meetings. We don't want to meet with anyone. We don't want to meet with them. And if these local people are representing this to the foreign companies, that somehow they will get a preference here, the answer is no. We have seen this in some other cases. We've seen this in other cases. It's going on and on. A few months ago, we've had cause to had someone arrested just here in this building. This was someone that met me in the oil and gas conference, Guyanese, and he took a picture with me. He then went to a number of people, collected money from them, told them he had a close relationship with me, he could arrange to see me. I never seen him in my life. And at the meeting at the conference, he asked us to meet with me. So I said, contact my secretary. So luckily, we got this information before. He then showed up here because my secretary called and she arranged the meeting. He showed up with another person that he was conning, bringing to the meeting. And he was arrested right here. So if this is going on. It has become almost like an industry now, where people are claiming they represent companies and all of that sort of thing, and I don't know what they're representing to these people. So if anyone is stupid enough to lose your money by thinking you will get any preferences because somebody arranged a meeting with some policymaker, well, it's your loss. It's your loss. So we're there because I've seen it happening here. We're extremely happy that most of the big projects are moving now to. As you have seen, the bridge was signed, the bridge across the Damar River. We have just gone out for the first phase of the Parika to Schoonard Road, and this phase will make a big difference. It's about $10 billion, about 50 million US, the bypass between Crane to the bridge, a 4-lane road, several, maybe 40 something or so bridges, and that will start very soon. As you know, the contract for the 4-lane to Diamond has already been awarded. I mentioned to you the Linden-Soos-Dyke Highway. It's been, that's before the ISDB board. We're opening bids for the Berbice Road from New Amsterdam to Molson Creek. This is removing the utilities from the road so we can pave that road. The bridges to Lethem have already been tendered. So quite a few of these things. The contract for the Ogle to Eccles bypass has been done. I just wanted you to understand that we're moving rapidly on these transformative projects too, as we move on addressing other concerns that people have. The hospitals, we're in negotiations with those. I mentioned the gas to energy project. Amila, we have been in discussion with the company since November last year. Where the discussions and negotiations are very difficult. And as of April 22nd, they wrote us saying that they're having a hard time doing the boot contract, and they want to shift to an EPC plus finance, that the government finances the project, and then there would be the EPC contractor. We're in the negotiations. We're still trying because to get them to meet the commitment that they bid for. But you know how this started. They started with Site Global, which is a subsidiary of Blackstone, choosing China Rail. And then the project didn't go through. We retendered, and they came out at about 7.7 cents per kilowatt hour. Under Blackstone, when Blackstone had chosen them, they were about 10 point something cents per kilowatt hour. But now they're saying they can't go ahead with the build, own, operate, transfer. They want to change the basis to an EPC plus finance. If we can change that, if we can get it done under the boot, we can proceed with the company. We'll have to retender. We will not be able to conclude the contract, because that is what the tender was about, a build, own, operate, transfer model, not an EPC finance model. And therefore, in the last maybe 6 months or so, we've been struggling to reach an agreement. So we are now going to have to give a deadline and then cancel if they can't proceed as the original model. So that we may have a setback there on that. But on the solar panels, remember that's our money, so those 35 megawatts will go out to tender very soon. That is for Linden, Essequibo, and Berbice. So the gas to energy project is running apace. This one is going to be tendered, the 35 megawatts. A mile we are stuck now with the possibility of having to retender because they can't conclude on the basis at which we tender. So that's on the energy side. So that might be a bit of a setback, but on the other hand, we're moving full steam ahead. So I just wanted to bring you up to date on those issues. This is the FAO draft report. The reason the minister has not released it as yet is not because there's a conspiracy, but it says second draft. And until it's finalized by the FAO, we now release it. But this is what it says on page 33. I read it back again. Currently, there are no major construction activities associated with the oil and gas sector in Guyana that are directly affecting marine or coastal habitats. Oil is being exploited from drill ships or floating production platforms rather than permanent rigs, and no pipelines are being used or under construction. The floating rig drilling rigs might serve as an aggregation point for pelagic fishing. In the same way, fish aggregation devices attract fish. Current oil and gas related activities are taking place far offshore, well beyond the major fishing zones on the continental shelf. Any impact of the floating oil and gas infrastructure is therefore only likely to affect positively or negatively the industrial line fishery for large pelagic fishes. While production in this fishery dropped in 2020, it fully recovered in 2021. They have some edits and stuff, because it's a second draft, but that's the main report. And so there is no big conspiracy. They looked at it, they failed, and they came up with this conclusion. I have a few things more, but I can end it. Thank you.
Yes. Vice President, you're currently in the consultation period for the LCDS. Do you find so far that the comments and questions received so far will substantially impact the strategy, and in what ways? And when does government plan to finalize the strategy and table it in Parliament?
Yes, so we're hoping to finalize maybe in a matter of weeks, because we have rolled out consultation strategy across the country in indigenous communities, in the regions, etc. We have quite a few comments that we are processing now to see how we can improve what we have for the better. And so we are taking each suggestion seriously, and we're analyzing if the suggestion can add value to what we already have. We anticipate that as soon as we complete this, the Parliament would have, as you asked, the Parliament would have a look at it and debate it. But we're very worried about the mindset of the opposition now. They are very negative on everything. Simultaneously, we are working to get our forest carbon on the market and to try to maximize the benefits that we receive from our forest carbon credits. And this is only right and just, given that the world pays nearly $90 per ton for carbon in another part of the world, and they are unwilling now to even guarantee a price of $10 for forest carbon. And a ton of carbon from whatever its source or wherever in the world that is emitted has the same impact on global warming. So our argument is that the developed world has to start creating incentives and markets for products supplied by the developing world. They can't want to treat developing world mitigation solutions as though it could be solved through philanthropy or goodwill, as they did in COP26 when they were just a declaration without allocation of resources to say deforestation must end by 2030. The other sources of emission, they get a lot of money to abate those, but they don't want to put in the money for forest-based solutions. And as you know, deforestation and land use change contributes about 16% of total greenhouse gases. So our arguments have been that you will never achieve net zero without addressing this primary source of emission too. And right now we don't see, in spite of the formation of LEAF, we don't see enough incentives in the market for countries like ours, Guyana, Gabon, Suriname, and others, to really to maximize benefits. Now, we have already decided through the money remaining from the first fund, the Norwegian fund, that apart from I had a meeting with the Norwegian ambassador and the officials who came here. We spoke a lot about the model building and about the future ways of intermediating these resources in a less bureaucratic manner without harming the transparency in the use of the resources for future. And we've also indicated our intention to utilize the remaining on program sum for the adaptation measures, and that is why we've launched these consultations across regions 2, 3, 5, and 6, where we're looking at structures similar to what we did at Hope Canal. The Hope Canal, that is an ability to manage water and to get it out to the Atlantic so as quickly as possible, given the changes in the intensity of rainfall and the amount of accumulation we can have in very short periods where there's inadequate storage and the rivers and the drainage canals, they can't store the water in any major way. So this is where we're utilizing some of those resources on adaptation. So as I said, the LCDS, the expanded LCS, would focus heavily on adaptation, preparing for the future, climate proofing our economy, even if we have money to spend some money from the oil and gas sector to climate proof our economy. And then secondly, heavy emphasis on water conservation management or watersheds, a whole range of other issues, integrated water management plan aggressively pursued, the biodiversity component, but just now expanding it in a major way to involve research and development and utilizing of the biodiversity of the country, not to preserve it in perpetuity, but also to bring some economic benefits to our people from using the biodiversity, but you have to use it in a sustainable manner. And then of course the forest carbon benefits. On the marine economy, which is part of the LCDS2, we are looking at a number of measures, including mangroves, etc., that will enhance the contribution of the marine economy, but take conservation issues out into that sphere now, because for a while it had been focused on largely on land and particularly in the forested areas. So we're getting feedback on all of these issues from various sources. Indigenous communities, some of them wanted to find out how much of the resources will be allocated. We have set aside 15% of whatever we earn will be given to indigenous communities. We made a commitment to FPIC that APNU just threw out the window, that the free, prior, informed consent. We resuscitated the land titling program. A lot of these issues, we welcome the extensive feedback.
I have some questions on file, but on the forest carbon market, do you see a lot of progress being made on this front internationally? Specifically, is there an interest from the developed world in finalizing the rules for this market?
So on that, the forest carbon and the international framework. So my point is that given what I just said, that the developed world, particularly the leaders, although they recognize the importance of preserving forests to biodiversity and to a climate objective, this has not been matched by the resource flow necessary to support that. And if in the agreement that is the COP agreement, this is not reflected with support from the developed world, then the ability to create markets surrounding forest carbon, similarly as that how markets surrounding other types of carbon have been created across the developed world. For example, the European Union emissions trading scheme in the UK and in other places. Then unless you have those formal markets in place, you're never going to see forest carbon trading at a price approximating what's taking place in any of these markets. So clearly, much more work has to be done by the developed world in pushing these frameworks. And even when there is support for a framework like LEAF, often the mechanism is a bit almost governmentish, if there is such a word. It's almost like, the same bureaucratic sort of thing. For example, and I've said this to Norway, now we sold our forest carbon. We earn the money. It goes into the IDB as the intermediary institution. And then when we want to access our own money, we then have to go through not just Norway procedures, but the Inter-American Development Bank procedures that are common, like the same if you're accessing a loan or a grant. Now they're just safeguarding, they're the trustee for money we earn. The only thing they should really be doing is to ensure that the tendering process is transparent. But that is what I mean by most of these initiatives still surround multilateral type of intermediary mechanisms. And it's slowing down the interest in the development of the markets, but it's also killing interest in these initiatives. So we now have to work globally to ensure that happens. Now we have some of the best, in fact, if not the best quality forest carbon in the world. And I dare say, I can say that with a great deal of confidence. Because we've had 10 years since the launch of the LCDS, 10 years of continuous monitoring, reporting, verification system, in a continuous monitoring, reporting, verification system in place that has tracked the change in forest carbon in Guyana. And these have been internationally verified. So we have a strong track record in this regard. So on LEAF, when we made the proposal, we were listed as one of the countries making proposal, and LEAF has been verifying these credits. So our credits will be verified credits that will be available to the market. And then we went up ahead with a request for proposals, which closed. That's a bidding process. So now we've received some bids basically, and we're in the discussion on those. And that would involve pricing issues and stuff like that. So notwithstanding what's happening globally, because of the quality of our forest carbon, and because we've acted early, and I told you the first year we got into office, I told you at the press conference here, that we're not just looking at credit from 2020 to 2025, we're looking back, going back to 2016, and trying to get paid for the missed opportunities that APNU caused.
Mr. Jagdeo, then should order raised. Sir, could you see why has the order not been issued for the private sector minimum wage, and what are the pros and cons? And also, could you provide us with any details with respect to what can be done to cushion the ongoing increases in fuel, gasoline, diesel, and so on? And quickly, thirdly, what reasons are being advanced by the Chinese company for not being in favor of the boot option?
So starting, not that they are not in favor of it, they simply can't raise the financing, because that meant they had to build it, own it, and supply us the power at a particular price, and then 20 years after transfer it to the government for free. That was what they bid on. So they had to raise, so we would not have any debt. There would be no debt associated. So that model you're saying they can't pursue. So they want the government to contract the debt and use them as contractor. So we said we did not bid for that. If we have to do it that model, we'd have to go back to 10. So that was one. On the cushioning, you know that the tax, the excise tax was 50%. So we reduced it to 0. We removed the excise tax. That is what we could have done, and that is what we did. Because there isn't anything else that we can do at this stage.
Nothing else.
Nothing else at this stage. Because if that's the only thing that the government used to collect in terms of revenue, and there is 0 revenue. We don't collect taxes now from people, down from 50% to 0. The other one, I'm not very familiar with this. You should talk to the Minister of Labor. That may be more his domain.
He says this with cabinet.
Okay, well then he would have to. I've now been in cabinet for a while, so I'll have to find out a bit about why he said it's cabinet and what the whole of is. I don't know.
And so, quickly, is government in favor of having the matter of the confirmation of the Chief Justice and the Chancellor be put on the agenda for discussions with the opposition leader?
This is in the domain of the President of the country. That's his responsibility, not opposition leader. And I've gone through a long period of this. Even when I as president, I put some names when they were in opposition, APNU, and never got approved. Never got approved for many, many years. So this sense of urgency now, the accumulated urgency, I know how we suffered from it because of that. So the president has to examine track record and everything else before he makes up his mind as to he wants to recommend. He has to examine. I don't think it's an automatic process. Therefore, if it's automatic, then you wouldn't have had need for this clause. So whenever the president is ready, he will inform the opposition leader, and then the opposition leader will have a chance to express a view as to whether he agrees or not. If he does not agree, you cannot have the confirmation. If he does agree, then you have confirmation. That's the constitution of Guyana, that everyone participated now in putting together APNU, AFC. Well, at that time I didn't even know they existed, or the whole country.
What's the mood in government? Did you go for confirming the existing soldiers? What's the mood?
I'm not, people's mood, I'm not a psychiatrist to comment on people's mood. I think, people's mood changes their moods here, Dennis, their moods change every day. You come down and you have heavy traffic on the road one day, people's mood may change. So I'm not like.
But is government likely to?
I think the PPP government will not make decisions based on the caprices associated with moods. They will make a decision, and the president will make a decision on the basis of studying the facts and the ability of people and what is good for the country, not on which side of the bed wake up in the morning.
Here's a guy from news.
Yes,
Sir,
yes.
just a quick clarification. On the Lisa 1 permit, gather from what you said that this permit will be renewed. Can you say when there will be any changes in the need for the new document, such as perhaps an example, an increase in the time for clearing?
Yeah, there will be an increase in the fact.
Can you give a bit more detail?
No, I'm not giving more detail, just that there will be an increase.
Sergeant Henry Kaitlin. I just wanted to find out as it relates to cost oil audit. The minister just stated that the operators would facilitate any sums that are not deemed appropriate for the auditing.
Facilitate sounds like.
Yeah, they would not basically allow for the claims to be made, that they would allow for the claims to be made. Is that written for, or is that just a vocal commitment?
No, that's the purpose of the audit. That's the whole purpose of the audit.
Yeah, he said beyond the time frame that the operator
that
would
there is-
allow.
no,
Is
no,
that
no.
written, or is that?
I dealt with the issue of timelines already. And I made it clear that the timelines in the contract, that with Exxon has agreed that none of those timelines will affect our ability to audit. That means if you don't do an audit, like within the first 2 years, then you lose the right to audit. So we have not lost the right to audit. Secondly, the purpose of the audit was to ensure what goes into the cost bank and what doesn't in expenditure. So if we find in the audits expenditure being made that do not form part of the cost bank, then the adjustments would have to be made in the accounts. And so it's either the accounts will be adjusted in a manner that could see an increase in our profit oil. Okay?
Sir, also, you mentioned the objective, the IMF objective, and you mentioned that Norway started saving 30 years later. Well, given the net zero transition that the world is looking at, Guyana basically has about 28 years to not just develop, but to benefit from its oil. How does that pan out how does that pan out the time span and our spending, which is basically more than what we would have received? Our budget spending from the oil?
I just gave an extensive explanation precisely.
Even our time frame, sir.
Right. So clearly, Norway waited 30 years when their economy and their people were at a certain level of, they had good qualities. Education, healthcare, the economy was kicking, the people were living a decent life before they saved for the future. Here, in the original period, you would think that some people were saying we should save every cent now, even though we have so many national needs to be addressed. We had to find a balance between the two. There are two extremes. And that is why we have, right at the beginning, committed, if you look at our manifesto too, to a sovereign wealth fund. And from the beginning, we are starting to save based on the formula that is in the Natural Resources Fund Act. So we're now waiting 30 years to establishing a sovereign wealth fund as Norway did. We're doing it almost immediately. And we're starting to save. So net zero doesn't mean that the world will not be producing oil and gas. That's another issue that many people believe net zero means net zero. If you look at the IEA study, the IEA study said in a net zero scenario, you will be needing about approximately 25 million barrels of oil per day. Now it's currently 100 million barrels. So we are arguing that the developed world and the current oil producers have been producing for a very long time and supplying the world, that they're the ones who must decarbonize faster. And if there is a 25 million barrel allowance for the world, that you will still need that in net zero scenario. That is for a whole range of activities, including cosmetics, industry, and other industry. That the developing world, countries like Gabon, Guyana, Nigeria, Suriname, they're the ones who must be producing that in the future. So it doesn't mean shutting down production, too. But your point about we are balancing both interests. We're saving now, and we're.
Sorry, is the government concerned that the value of the global oil market will decrease over time, and that might have some effect on the income that we might be getting for the value of crude in the future?
Well, it's anyone's guess, but given that now, in the short term, given that world demand for energy is growing, and the pace of supply to meet that demand of fossil fuel, of renewable energy, is not keeping abreast with the pace of growth in demand, then what you will have is a greater demand for fossil fuel energy to be produced. And that's what's happening in the near term. And especially if you take Russia out of the supply mix. So in the near term, I don't see anything on the horizon that will accelerate the pace of production of renewable to a point where it starts cutting deep into the supply of fossil-related fuel. But in the long run, the idea is that, yes, we have to plan for that future. And that is why when we say, in this window, we have to accelerate exploration and try to get as much out as possible and utilize the money in a manner to transform our economy, to climate-proof it, to get our people standards of living up, and save some of the money before the window closes or becomes narrow. That is the logic. That is precise logic, what we're working on. Yes.
So just for the benefit of my article, can you please state what would be the negatives of this new form of oil company? Because you said the reason you guys look at that is to address setup and funding for net zero and all these things. But if you think about it, if it's just a passive ownership, it also addresses the more popular concerns, including the set of time, because you just, it's an
So even the key thing was, so globally there is a sense that if you own it, it belongs to the people. And some of these companies were set up in a way to break foreign monopolies. I think we're not there in Guyana. So the key variable here, the key variable, we are going to change the PSA. So let me give you, for example, so if we're getting, say, 50% of total revenue now through this PSA, I'm just using figures, not the exact figures, but just a way of illustrating an example. So the new PSA can then give us, say, 60% of all of the proceeds, the revenue, coming from our company. So a company, whether national oil company or not, has to give us at least 60% of the proceeds in the new PSA, should they start production. Then we're thinking, would ownership give us another set of money? So assuming we own 10% now or 20% of another company, will we then get even more than the 60% coming to the budget and to the natural resource fund under the country? And so that's a key variable. But to get that 20% ownership, how much money do we have to put in a risky venture? What if you have to put in money now and there's a dry well? Now there is this point about, I see a lot of that. If the wells are dry and they never move to a production agreement, the companies lose all the money. If they start producing like what Exxon did, then they have the right to claim back the exploration expenses. So many people don't know that. For example, they say, oh, we'd have to pay back all of these people all the money that they're drilling for these dry wells. I saw some of that in Kaijor too. So it is not true. Only if you move on to produce, because you can't come and say, oh, I drilled 10 dry holes, and then I want the country to give me back my money for the dry holes I drilled. It doesn't work like that. Every company that runs into would spend 200 million US on doing maybe 4 or 5 of these. They drill five wells, and they all dry. They lose the $200 million. Where they can't come back to us. But if they now move later, say they find oil and then they start producing, then they can claim back for it, only if they find. And so that is what people don't understand. So assuming we go into a national oil company and we have to put in money, and then the well is dry, and you can't move on to production, you lose that money too. So we have to look at all of those issues and whether we want to spend our money in a very risky venture in that way too. So there are lots of variables. That was the only factor though. Can we earn more?
Okay, and did you decide seismic or no seismic?
Most likely, the idea is, I think most likely we're heading towards as is now.
Okay.
With whatever information we have now, because the market is good now, the price of oil is high, and I think now is the right time if we go to the auction.
Okay.
So we're aiming towards, we're angling towards going, should we go, using the current data set, not generating future data set.
And any promise of relinquishment?
Yes, we're moving forward and taking all that the agreement state the relinquishment when people have to relinquish. So a rigid enforcement on the relinquishment provisions. We should ask the ministry about that.
Oh, and before you think, in response to Kimal's question, you said that there's a bit of worry in the government that because the opposition is saying no to everything. Would there be a consideration for the technical team from the climate change office to speak to the oppositions beforehand so that they can have a proper understanding of the document?
Anything that would make sense, we'll do. Technical, non-technical, whatever. We'll try to reach out. We tried to on several occasions, but I was more of an optimist until my most recent encounters with the opposition, and given this sort of thing like blatant lies, how How could you put something like this out knowing that it may be leaked, but there are different times. There was a time when they would have distributed in this in Linden, and we would have never seen it. We would have never seen it. Or South Georgetown. But times are changing. They don't know who they may be distributing to a PBB man in Linden or in South Georgetown now. So times are changing. You can't go in with the stereotypes anymore and the lies. People discover you, what you're doing on the ground.
Brian, United Times. In light of the issues with China Railway and Milo, are timelines being revised? Because 2022 was the start of construction.
Yes. We will definitely have to revise timelines. We'll have to. It depends on what will happen, the timelines of that. But that will not affect, in any case, that will not affect our commitment to drop the price by 50%. Because the commitment was on the basis of the power supply from the gas to energy project. So that timeline is very strong, and we're going out to drop the price for power by 50% by 2024, so in 2024, as soon as that one gets done up.
David, for one establishments, just a quick follow-up. Is there a timeline for negotiations to conclude on this specific issue?
Yeah, it's about unless they can, maybe in a matter of weeks or so, verify that we can go with this model. Clearly, we can't go with that model. We did not tender that model. So, so it's a last-ditch attempt to save the model. But if that model is not agreed to, we can't go with anything.
And are you guys looking to go to another bidder or so to start negotiations?
Because the next bidder is at 9.9 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's a significantly higher bidder. So we made no such decision, no.
Okay. And if you have to go back to tender, is government looking to go back to the EPC style?
We have not decided as yet, or that will be down the road. We'll have to decide that down the road, but right now we can't do that because you see when Blackstone was developing the project, and the same China Rail was the contractor that they chose, we didn't choose them. The 10-point-something cents at that time was fairly good for us because at the price of oil we were generating power 20 cents per kilowatt hour.
Mm-hmm.
But with our project coming on stream, with the gas to energy, now that we're doing 67 cents per kilowatt hour, that suddenly, that 10-point-something cents, it has to come downwards. Because at that time it was favorable, but now it's not so favorable because we have another source for generating power that is significantly cheaper, the cost. And so that is the key question. So you don't want to lock in at say 10 cents per kilowatt hour for the next 20 years. And lock in on that for the next 20 years when we can get it maybe 6, 7 cents per kilowatt hour maximum from the gas to energy project. We may even have to consider whether we have to bring in or do more from gas in the shorter term until we get a favorable project in that regard.
It's just a few questions, sir. We've seen reports from the USA, UK, and Canada, all of which are saying that they're moving to increase the royalty system that they have for the oil and gas sector, especially when you look at the profits that many companies are making during this particular time. Can you say what would be Guyana's position,
Yeah, sure.
whether we would follow that pathway or not? Secondly, during the interview that you had said that Guyana is considering a partner from the Middle East for the model that you would use for the NOC. Can you say why the Middle East was chosen as opposed to closer to home with Trinidad and Tobago, which has a lot of experience in what not to do with an NOC? And thirdly, can you give us some color on some of the biddable items For example, would royalty be one of the biddable items for the auction that you have in September? And has any decision been made as yet on whether Exxon would be excluded from that process? Fourthly, sir, can you say to what extent?
One minute. Excluded, and yes. I got there, why not TNT, Middle
Yes.
East, biddable items, Exxon excluded. What's the fourth, what is the third one?
So I asked you about the royalty, the consideration of the partner.
Oh, the foreign, yes, windfall
Yes.
tax, windfall tax.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
And fourthly, sir, we saw the signing of the MOU between Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. Can you shed some light on what were possibly some of the acts of Trinidad and Tobago? Was any interest expressed in getting a portion of our oil to perhaps revitalize their oil industry or a portion of our gas? Was any discussion had in that regard? I'll save the last one.
So,
and
okay, yes.
Answer this.
So, on the windfall tax that some countries are exploring on the intense pressure on their populations, not doing so willingly, I see in some cases. The problem here in Guyana is because we are bound by a PSA with very specific terms on the taxation side. And so if you change the taxation here, it's considered a breach of the contract. So unlike those countries that have these companies that are operating for many, many years, for 40, 50 years, they fall under the standard tax regime for the country. So Parliament could easily go pass legislation and then institute a windfall tax. So that is the reason why we can't do that here, because we run afoul of the agreement. We are also hopefully benefiting a bit from the windfall by virtue of that's an increase in prices by virtue of our 14.5%, because we get a higher share, no more money from it. And we said that there were operators, people from the Middle East, who had expressed interest. So we didn't identify to work with any single group. We said they had expressed interest. Now, clearly, there was an understanding that should they come to the table, they'd have to have deep pockets to finance the exploration activities, because if you have an operator who comes to the table, takes these unallocated lots, and can't raise money for it, then you have a slowdown in activity in these areas. So we clearly have to choose a partner along those lines. I don't know, Trinidad and Tobago now, their national oil company, I don't think they have a lot of money now to put into any such activity or company. I don't want to say much more, but you can find out yourself. I think they have a huge fiscal deficit, they have major revenue shortfalls, and the state has fiscal issues there, and it's still state-owned company. So you cannot, I don't think you can choose a partner there. Then the partners may have to also have experience. We have to look at partners who have experience in working in deep water, because there are not many around the world. So carefully you have to look at it. I don't know, we have a team advising us now on how we go pursue the auction, because it's the first time we're going to auction. So the team is advising us on, if we go to auction, how best do we maximize value at the auction. So it may not be, it may be just a straightforward auction to bid for your blocks, because royalty and the others come only if you're going into a production agreement, which is down the road. So we may not just look at that at the beginning. But I don't know what model we will ultimately go. But because we expect the PSA will be a standard PSA which will determine the royalty rate that should they proceed, the production agreement they would have to pay.
That's why I was trying to ascertain if royalties, because some countries take royalty and put it as a billable item.
Yes.
Other countries just say
A
this is
standard
exactly what
PSA.
it
So
is.
we're heading right now closer to the model because we have had so many others who have not gone through that bidding process, but they are now exploring. So we now, the PSA, the new standard PSA is the one that they have to come in on. But we're open to the discussions to see what will maximize value. We're not taking a decision as yet whether Exxon and the others will be excluded or not. If you exclude, because there is an argument you should exclude because they have so many areas that they have, and the other argument is that if you reduce the number of bidders, you may get less, it may become less competitive and a lower bid. So it's between those two variables. We still need to make the decision. And the signing of the MOU, I don't think specifics were discussed. The specifics were not discussed. So I guess we'll have to move forward over the course of time to see if we can work out any arrangement that would be useful to both countries.
And finally, I wanted to ask you about the Agri Forum and Expo. We saw that the vision and objectives of the President Ali initiative mirrors much of what the Jagdeo initiative had when it was started, but that was not realized. Do you think the same risks are present and that the President Ali initiative may see the same fate, or do you think oil changes that perspective?
I'm hoping that, given what has happened since the 2006, 2005, 2006, would demonstrate to the leaders of our region the need, the absolute necessity, not the need, but just an absolute necessity of securing food supplies. Even not the dual objective that we had set out when we launched that initiative in 2005, which was food security and a commercially viable agriculture sector. So we were working on two fronts, agribusiness and also ensuring we had food to eat. The world has seen a lot of turmoil, and we have seen governments fall because of inadequacy of food. We've seen hunger develop in many parts of the world because countries, even with resources, can't secure supplies. And the way it's going now, as I think one of the prime ministers pointed out, if a ship can't sail from Miami in a few weeks, if for bad weather or for whatever reason, many of the islands will not have any food. And so we knew that right at the beginning. We urged the regional leaders to, as early as 2005, to focus on this. Some countries have moved forward on food production, others have not. In Guyana, we have made great strides towards, we are a net food exporter, we're now self-sufficient in many of the things that we were importing, and we're looking to even further replace some of the things we're importing through very specific plans. So we have, in Guyana's case, some specific plans for corn and soya. We've co-invested. We now have a consortium working on this. They started growing already. That is there. We're now doing the trials in wheat. We believe we're in a matter of maybe 5 years, We probably could produce as much meat as we consume locally. We're bringing in livestock from Barbados, from Brazil, the embryos, animal for dairy and beef, large quantities, maybe 2,000 heads of animals coming in from Brazil to improve the quality of our herds here. And we're so a lot of work is being done on this. On the pig rearing, the Army is now working at producing like 4,600 breeding animals this year for the farmers. On aquaculture, we've moved, you saw that small project. We just said, what can we do to help the farmers in Berbice? And for a tiny bit of investment, we've now gone from about 250,000 kilograms of shrimp, and by next year it would be 1 million kilograms. That's over 2 million pounds of shrimp, producing just in the swamplands at the back, with very little infrastructure. Tubes, putting in the tubes, ensuring better water flow, helping them to build some things so that you don't have excess water flowing in and stuff like that. Minor investments. Hemp, we're going to look at hemp as a new industry. We'll table the legislation. So I'm going up this week, to meet with the farmers in the Crabwood Creek area. There are 12,000 of them 12,000 acres that were supplying Skeldon factory cane. They're now not doing anything. And the road going to the bridge, Molson Creek Road, we're doing a road now. That has opened up another 18,000 acres of land. That's about 30,000 acres of land, leaving out the 30,000 under the Skeldon factory itself, that we're now looking to put into large-scale agriculture. So it is a lot of focus on we have a strong focus. We are looking at the policies, the research necessary. So in Guyana's case, we can support the region. President Ali has been doing this, supporting the region. We can push, we can bring focus on this, try to remove the barriers to trade and to development and co-invest with people. But in each country, the leadership has to be taken by the government. And that is why I pointed out the speech I made here, that there has to be a champion in each country for the sector. Just like how you have champions for the tourism sector in the region. You can't want to develop agriculture and give no tax incentive for agriculture. But you have tourism and you get all the incentives. You have to also give the agriculture sector. You have to allocate a share of your budget to building the infrastructure for the farmers in all the regions, in St. Vincent and all of the islands. And I know some governments are doing things, but like Prime Minister Skerritt focuses heavily on that. You have to, if you're taking loans, you have to borrow for the sector. So you can't just have agriculture growing and neglect totally and treat it as a residual item at the budget time. If you have to balance the budget, you have ring-fence expenditure in tourism and other areas, and so all the cuts to balance the budget comes at the expense of agriculture. That's not going to ensure that people have food. And we're making sure long into the future our people can feed it, would have food to eat. Because this world, where it's going, water stress, climate ravage, all of that, and with supply problems, people now going to have food. Look at what happened in the US. President Biden had to authorize the military to fly in baby food into the US from Europe. So we're not going to, that's why we're looking to that future for our people. And for the region too, if we can create the markets and the barriers come down. So whilst we recognize there is that danger, in the region now embracing the same initiative and moving forward, we're going to encourage, work with people, but here nationally, where we at least can determine what happened, then we're going to push aggressively. And that is what it helps also with keeping the economy balanced so that we don't suffer the same dreaded Dutch disease. Focus on other sectors growing too.
Sir, a follow-up on
Yeah.
yes. Everything that you outlined there, yes, pretty. But all those things were reflected in your initiative. You had the constraints and you had the solutions.
Yeah.
So it's hardly anything new. What she's asking and what I really want to know is, what is the change now that you think that these things the leaders are actually going to implement it? Is it the 25 by 25, or is it because Guyana is in a better position, a position of strength now?
No, I think that's what I'm saying. The times have changed, and I think people understand more starkly now that you can run a country but not have your food supplies in peril. And that has a political kind of impact. Because politicians who can see their people get food or have food shortages are not going to do well at elections.
So the interests are clearer now.
Right, the interests are clearer now, I think, because the situation is more stark. The world has changed enormously in these 15 years, and what we were talking about then didn't seem so urgent, but it has become a very urgent now.
Sir, can you offer a reason as to why there hasn't been a COI into the 2020 election, and does the government still support the programs of that?
We actually wanted the COI. We ran into difficulties when the court cases were filed, because a lot of people said the people who were charged are some of the central figures in any COI. Now when they are charged, they will, as their defense, they would say, I don't want to appear in the COI, or whatever I say there could incriminate me in the court case. So you may lose the key figures who were in charge of the rigging in any COI. So that was the rationale. But we believe that it is quite clear that there was an attempt to steal the election. It's quite clear that's going to be conclusion. So yeah, any COI would conclude that, and we may still pursue it.
There were accusations from both sides. So what I'm
No,
trying to get at,
there are accusations from both sides,
right.
but the SOPs can be produced. We produce our statements of poll. The statements of poll before the Chief Justice that they always had show that the PP won the elections. They need to still tell us how Mingo came up with those numbers that he published, where he got them. This was even before the result. But Mingo will not be able to tell the people at the COI, because they wouldn't be able to call him. He would say, I'm not coming there because I have a court case filed against me. And so if he doesn't say how he came up with it, the COI, we wouldn't know how Valder Lawrence's name got on the RO report, when nobody should be signing an RO report. Oh, we got to know that, because they're going to just say, we're not. We're charged now, so we can appear before the COI. We'd love to have a COI so we could ask some questions.
Would the government support GCOM? I mean, GCOM is independent, but would you support the GCOM?
That's a matter for GCOM. You just made the point. That's a matter for GCOM to deal with there. But in our case, it's quite clear. We would like to launch a COI, the government. You know, like Granger had a COI into everything. 2 planting chip fall off that somebody truck, he wants a COI, and spent millions of dollars doing that.
Sir, given the comment that you just made in response to Kiana's question about government's inability to amend the royalty and taxation clause in the contract, like the ABC countries are doing, is government...
No, they're not doing that, because not that they are amending anything.
They are increasing their royalties. That's what I mean.
They're increasing. No, it's a windfall tax.
Mm.
It's a windfall tax, which is different than increasing. Yes, but different countries have different. So it's called a windfall. That is the windfall increase. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, given all the criticisms about the stability clause that we've had over the past few years, is government looking at reducing the strength of that clause in the model PSA?
we have to strengthen you'd always need a stability clause for investors. But it is what you're trying to keep stable. That is what is important. So we made it clear the things that affect our interests now can be defined. There are the profit share, the royalty rate, the lack of ring fencing provisions, some excessive tax benefits. These are 4 of the big components that we will see addressed in a new PSA. So you can have a stability clause keeping the new arrangement stable, but not the, so that is how we see it.
What's the consideration for the profit share? You come with a figure yet?
No, that's what I'm saying, that those are the areas that we will, it can't be done as a single item, it has to be as a package. How much more of the overall revenue of the company you're taking through a series of measures, through royalty, through taxes, through profit share, etc. And then you can compare where we stand in a global spectrum of some of the countries that take as much as 75% and some that take probably 40%, where we stand on this spectrum. So you have to get closer to the top of the spectrum. And this is for more, a lot of these are developed jurisdictions, and Canada has a something. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, talking about changes, as it relates to decommissioning, we understand now that the operator is allowed to start getting fees for that action that will take place about 20 years down the line. Would there be any changes to that particular clause, decommission of the well?
Oh no, the decommissioning here, you always have to provide for decommissioning.
Yeah, but currently what we understand is that the operator
yes.
is accessing that.
So you can do a number of things. As I said before, we'd have to look at the net take. In such an agreement, it's the net take. I don't want to get into every component and how it would evolve, but the net take has to approximate a global situation for a country of similar circumstances. So the decommissioning, you have to have money set aside. It is, do you set aside all of it at the end or all of it at the beginning, or do you every year make allowance to do that? Those are the variables.
And since the operator is accessing this money before the time period, can Guyana say, well, it is monitoring this money or making sure that this money is available when the time comes to use it, meaning that the operator is accessing it?
Yeah, but it's not like Exxon will put the money there and leave it. Money is utilized in a manner, the funds are fungible. So to the extent that it's utilized and it reduces the cost of, say, borrowing, which is ultimately a cost to be borne by the company, then that would be seen as productive use. If they utilize it for Exxon for private purposes alone, then that would not be seen as a productive use.
Sir, CDX, it doesn't intend to drill any exploration wells in the Denmark Block for the year, despite Minister Barrett informing the company that 2 exploration wells are required by February 2023. So, how is government going to treat the CGX?
Well, let me say to CGX publicly too, that they have had a long period here, and I'm very pleased that they have moved forward, but if they don't meet their commitments, then there will be consequences. It has to be as clear as that, because they've been nurtured along for a long time, and they have to meet all the commitments that they signed up to. If there are extenuating circumstances, we look at that. But you can't come and say, oh, we can't raise the money. That's not our business. Then you have to relinquish the block. It's as clear as that. So if they're now moving ahead as planned, there have to be really good reasons for them to retain the areas. It's as straightforward as that.
I want to pose my remaining questions, and perhaps you could answer them in one go. The government budgeted $88 million to review.
We're going on too long though. You want to send these to me at some other time and give you an opportunity. Is there anything outside of the oil and gas sector?
No.
Oil and gas, anyone?
Mr. Jagdeo, you and your government have been accused of fooling your supporters in the sugar belt by promising to keep the estates afloat. Now you're talking about scaling back and getting into hemp. What do you say to those people who accuse you of fooling your supporters?
Yeah, well, it's precisely the happening. But you saw what I've been explaining everywhere I go. What we have to do now. So I pointed out that we said we will reopen the estates. Let me go through this again. That at Wales there was no questioning about the opening because APNU not only shut down the factory, gave out their lands, gave their houses out, in fact sold some of their houses, but they also sold the scrap metal, the factory itself as scrap metal. And I wish that somebody from the media will ask a bit more about the contract for the scrap metal for Wales. How that was done, who got it, and when the tenders were done and everything else, and see who got it. So there was nothing there to reopen. So we had to find job creation for people there, but also on the West Bank. So we believe now, through this investment, several sorts of investment that we are facilitating. The gas to energy project, the development of the shore-based facility on the other side of the river, the movement of we've seen several projects now on that West Bank that they can more than offset the jobs that we lost in that area. So we're working aggressively to ensure that people here have employment. At Enmore, it's the same thing. We now have to move. We decided we'll move the packaging plant to Blaymont, where they're already packaging sugar, one line there, and to Albion. And so we are in that facility alone, which we at least we will get about 800 to 1,000 jobs. You had about 700 persons lost their jobs there. We've just also given about 10 acres to another factory that's establishing down at Enmore that will create close to another 1,000 jobs. That's about 2,000 jobs in the same area. At the Fowles Industrial Estate, which is a Buxton Fowles area, it's a stone throw away from Enmore Enterprise, Strasby, all of these areas up to Buxton, that would generate maybe at least a minimum of 2,000 jobs. The interest that we see. So we are taking steps to address that. At Rose Hall, there are 2/3 of the people. There are about 900 persons who were laid off there. 2/3 have been rehired. But we have big problems with procuring the material because of a lot of the equipment and stuff can't come in to restart the operations there, given COVID. At Skelton, of the 2,000 odd persons who were there, about 400 or 500 have been rehired. The rest now are out of a job. So that is why I'm working in the Crabwood Creek area, those private lands. We then have to look at the hemp industry and then look to restart sugar in a smaller scale, but convert some of the lands into aquaculture, etc. Every one of these areas where we've lost jobs, we are looking to put in an alternative set of activities. So we're not, and we go and explain this to people. I was there in Scotland, met with the sugar workers, I explained this to them. But the same people who callously, Ramjatan is saying this, he's the one who says up to now, sugar is dead, not do anything for sugar workers. The same ones who callously shut down the industry are now expressing concerns that we fool the sugar workers. But I've been on the ground explaining to them what we're doing. So people know on the ground who believe and who not to believe.
But are these sugar workers also in some instances being retrained to take up new jobs? Because we're talking numbers.
I agree, Dennis, but I didn't want to be comprehensive. At Wales, I said, if you get all of the people there, not just at Wales, but not Wales, IFLA, I was there recently. You give me the numbers and we can find the training programs. In fact, I know now about employees in Region 4 who are looking for about 400 to 500 people who can hire 50 persons immediately and even train them. They run out of labor in Region 4. In many ways, they're looking every day to get people to work. And the same thing is going to start happening on the West Bank. The other regions harder for right now. That is why we started the temporary employment program until we can train up and people move. So I dealt with that too, but I didn't want to be comprehensive.
You're keeping IFLA.
Yes, I thought will be kept. I thought will be kept.
Mr. Jagdeo, the opposition leader was supposed to meet the president today for consultations. I don't know if you knew, but he has not. He's been a no-show. Anything on that off at the top of your head?
Been a no-show many places, I don't know. Mr. Norton knows that he had this big bravado, oh, I'm going to tell the president to do this, I'm going to tell him to do that. He recognized that there's very little scope for him to tell the president to do anything. So he feels very uncomfortable in that sort of environment where he's not performing and putting on a show. And so I have no doubt that influenced him, as well as his disastrous performance when he came here the last time. He even forgot which vehicle came in and ran in the wrong vehicle. And frankly speaking, if I had done that was a genuine mistake, I'd tell the man, drive around the corner and drive around the corner and drop me off there and call the other man to pick me up. He ran out the vehicle, clutched his bag like this, and ran back in front of the entire media. I said before, not ready for this. It's one thing to talk a lot out there and stir people up. Another thing to run a government. It's a very different thing. And so I think he is scarred by that disastrous performance, and no doubt might be extremely fearful that the media might be there again. So he didn't show up today, but he may show up unannounced another day. So I hope that the president continues to discharge the responsibility, because he had very specific thing. He asked for some time and the information. The president sent those things. So by now he shared his views with the president. He had the option of doing so in writing too. Maybe he opted to share his views in writing. Thank you. Yeah, if you want it, Kimal, you can send those to me.
Okay, no problem.